This is Ed Murrow. They have been chosen to the radio program This I Believe, which in less than 2 years has become perhaps the most widely heard program in the world. It has been a rare experience to see the interest in this program grow. We live in a time when people are concerned with belief, deeply concerned, not to know what others believe. They want to test what they themselves believe. It certainly has not been our observation that this is a careless or a carefree time, but it also is not a time of cynicism. Beliefs matter to the American of today. They matter tremendously. We know that the beliefs heard on this program have been a stimulus and help to a multitude of listeners and readers all over the world. Let me say this, that beliefs change. Indeed, the faculty of modifying a belief to accord with experience is essential to spiritual growth. Often, the convictions of one generation are the rejects of the next. So said Judge Learned Hand, and he went the possibility that as time goes on, we shall accumulate some body of valid conclusions. But it does mean that we can achieve only by accumulation, that wisdom is to be gained only as we stand upon the shoulders of those who have gone before. Just statecraft, no generation can safely start at scratch. So our personal basic beliefs must be slowly built from our experience, but also from a study of the experience and conclusions of others. That, Judge Hand said in commenting on this program, is the reason and the value of This I Believe. No doubt the beliefs of others is due partly to the yearning to have something formulated that one has known. Many of our guests challenge to define their beliefs in the set limit of 500 or 600 words. Many have told us it helped them to have to be definite. We are sure it helps anyone to state what he believes. A person who knows his beliefs has made a propitious start on knowing himself, and he also knows ever so much better what he wants out of life and what it takes to get it. No beliefs are universally held. Intelligent and decent men differ on every subject. Judged from our experience with this program, the most widely held beliefs are in a supreme being, in a universe ruled by law, in a moral code based on the teachings of Jesus, and in the inherent rights on which this country was founded, in liberty, the dignity of the individual, in personal freedom and personal responsibility. But the beliefs you're about to hear have not been chosen because they are representative. Each one is here for a particular reason. We start, as we should, with a revered elder, none other than Bernard Baruch. We go on to the moving declaration of a great American actress, Helen Hayes, who was brought to the death of her child. Next follows the straightforward affirmation of a Negro who won the Nobel Peace Prize, Dr. Ralph Bunche. Then you will hear a businessman who dares to say, "I have never known, really known, a man or woman whom I couldn't like or respect." The statement follows of Mrs. Marty Mann, whose understanding of suffering enabled her to change from an alcoholic to lead a great organization dedicated to the redemption of alcoholics. We bring you a characteristic and human declaration by the most widely known woman in the world, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. You will hear Louis Seltzer, editor of the Cleveland Press, tell in practical and literal words of his daily conference with God. We bring the triumph of the human spirit over adversity, Helen Keller, and we end with the careful affirmation of a philosopher, Will Durant, and the exalted eloquence of a poet, Carl Sandburg. These are the beliefs of 10 remarkable men and women. As such, they are sure to interest you. But they might do more than interest you. They might well make you more aware than you have been of the value of affirmed beliefs and of the importance to you of knowing what it is you believe. Now for the first voice. It is that of Bernard M. Baruch, businessman and philosopher, who at 83 is beloved and honored by a nation as its elder statesman. Mr. Baruch.
When I was a younger man, I believed that progress was inevitable. that the world would be better tomorrow and better still the day after. The thunder of war, the stench of concentration camps, the mushroom cloud of the atomic bomb are, however, not conducive to optimism. All our tomorrows, for years to come, will be clouded by the threat of a terrible Holocaust. Yet, my faith in the future, though somewhat shaken, is not destroyed. I still believe in it. If I sometimes doubt that man will achieve his mortal potentialities, I never doubt that he can. I believe that these potentialities promise all men a measure beyond reckoning of the joys and comforts, material and spiritual, that life offers. Not utopia, to be sure. I do not believe in utopias. Man means but perfection. Paradise is not for this world. All men cannot be masters, but none need to be a slave. We cannot cast out pain from the world, but needless suffering we can. Tragedy will be with us in some degree as long as there is life, but misery we can banish. Injustice will raise its head in the best of all possible worlds, but tyranny we can conquer. Evil will invade some men's hearts, and tolerance will twist some men's minds, but decency is a far more common human attribute, and it can be made to prevail in our daily lives. I believe all this because I believe above all else in reason, in the power of the human mind to cope with the problems of life. Any calamity visited upon man either by his own hand or by a more omnipotent nature could have been avoided, or at least mitigated by a measure of thought. To nothing so much as the abandonment of reason does humanity owe its sorrows. Whatever failures I have known, whatever errors I have committed, whatever follies I have witnessed in private and public life have been the consequence of action without thought. Because I place my trust in reason, I place it in the individual. There is a madness in crowds from which even the wisest, caught up in their ranks, are not immune. Stupidity and cruelty are the attributes of the mob, not wisdom and compassion. I have known, as who has not, personal disappointments and despair. But always the thought of tomorrow has buoyed me up. I have looked to the future all my life. I still do. I still believe that with courage and intelligence, we can make the future bright with fulfillment.
The next voice you hear will be familiar to you. It belongs to Helen Hayes. We know her as a great actress, an artist who has risen to the leadership of her profession and who richly merited the fame that has come to her. Yes, she was successful. She was gifted. She married the man she loved. She loyally served her grateful public. But she will tell you that somehow the meaning of things escaped her. Then her daughter died of polio. What helped her then? Was it success, talent, fame? Let her answer the question herself.
Life seems to be a series of crises that have to be faced. In summoning strength to face them, though, I once fooled myself into an exaggerated regard of my own importance. I felt very independent. I was only distantly aware of other people. I worked hard and was successful. In the theater, I was brought up in the tradition of service. The audience pays its money, and you're expected to give your best performance both on and off the stage. So I served on committees and made speeches and backed causes. But somehow the meaning of things escaped me. When my daughter died of polio, everybody stretched out a hand to help me. But at first I couldn't seem to bear the touch of anything, even the love of friends. No support seemed strong enough. While Mary was still sick, I used to go early in the morning to a little church near the hospital to pray. There the working people came quietly to worship. I had been careless with my religion. I'd rather cut God out of my life. And I didn't have the nerve at that time to ask him to make my daughter well. I only asked him to help me understand, to let me come in and reach him. And I kept looking for a revelation, but nothing happened. And then, much later, I discovered that it had happened right there in that church. I could recall vividly, one by one, the people I had seen there. The solemn laborers with tired looks, the old women with gnarled hands. Life had knocked them around, but for a brief moment, they were being refreshed by an ennobling experience. It seemed as they prayed, their worn faces lighted up and they became the very vessels of God. Here was my revelation. Suddenly I realized I was one of them. In my need, I gained strength from the knowledge that they too had needs, and I felt an interdependence with them. I was learning the meaning of love thy neighbor. Truths as old and simple as this began to light up for me like the faces of the men and women in the little church. When I read the Bible now, I take the teachings of men like Jesus and David and St. Paul as the helpful advice of trusted friends about how to live. They understand that life is full of complications and often heavy blows, and they are showing me the wisest way through it. I must help myself, yes, but I'm not such a self-contained unit that I can live aloof unto myself. That was the meaning that had been missing before, the realization that I was a living part of God's world of people.
Dr. Ralph Bunche is another person who achieved fame. He won the award most men would treasure above all others. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was the first man of his race to do so. This was for mediating the Palestine conflict. Uprightness, modesty, and good sense must be in the equipment of a great mediator. Dr. Bunche is an optimist, and he does not believe in pressing time or fate. He believes in himself, but he also believes it wrong to take himself too seriously. He believes in people and their essential goodness. Now hear him tell how he came by these beliefs.
I feel more than a little self-conscious about trying to elucidate my personal, private creed. For after all, when a person strips down all the way to his innermost beliefs, and in public, he stands awfully exposed. I have found this a very great challenge. Indeed, in reflecting on how to respond to it, and in trying to sort out the things I really believe in from the things I merely know, I have learned quite a bit about myself. It strikes me as a very useful experience to sit down with oneself and seriously think through one's beliefs and convictions. The trail of my beliefs and their development leads back to my childhood. I was reared in a deeply religious family. It was a sort of matriarchal clan, ruled over by my maternal grandmother, Nana, a name, incidentally, which I had given her as a tot in trying clumsily to say grandma, and by which she was thereafter known to all the family and the family's friends. Nana, a strong and devout personality, beloved and respected by all who knew her, guided the family by simple but firm beliefs. Foremost, she believed in God. In worldly matters, she believed that every person, without regard to race or religion, has a virtually sacred right to dignity and respect, that all men are brothers and are entitled to be treated as equals and to enjoy equality of opportunity, that principle, integrity, and self-respect are never to be worn as loose garments. For each of us in that family, these beliefs almost automatically came to be part of our very being. For me, this was particularly so, since Nana became both mother and father to me when in my early youth I lost both parents. In my youth, I had what many would consider a poor and hard life. But as I recall it, I was never unhappy. Rather, I enjoyed my youth immensely, for I had been taught how to appreciate and get the most out of very little, and that happiness in any circumstance is primarily a matter of control over one's state of mind. I find that most everything in which I now believe, my personal creed and the source of such moral strength as I may command, stem from the simple lessons I learned at the knee of this remarkable little woman. This certainly has been the greatest single influence in my life. Like Nana, I have an implicit belief in a supreme being and a supreme will beyond the ken of mortal man. I hold that it is right to believe in oneself, but it is wrong ever to take oneself too seriously. For a keen sense of personal values and that humility which accompanies a balanced perspective are indispensable to congenial adjustment to life in society. I believe that no man can be happy within himself if he ever surrenders his dignity and self-respect. I have faith in people, in, collectively, their essential goodness and good sense, granted that there will be individual mavericks on every human range. I believe that man can learn to live together in harmony and peace in the international community as in domestic communities, and I am unfalteringly devoted, therefore, to the historic effort of the United Nations toward this end. I believe also in looking always on the brighter side of things, in the ability of right somehow ultimately to prevail, in never pressing time or fate, in taking life philosophically and in stride, both the good and the bad, and I have had an ample measure of both. These are some, at least, of my beliefs. They are, for me, imperative beacons, without which life would be utterly lacking in direction or meaning.
Belief in people also characterizes the next guest, Charles H. Percy. He is a corporation head who has been designated as one of the 10 outstanding young men of the country. His is a remarkable and challenging belief, for he is the one who says that he never has really known a man or woman whom he couldn't respect and like. Could you say that? Could I? Should I be able to? Perhaps I need to examine myself. There may be such a thing as being too worldly wise and not enough people wise. Here is Mr. Percy.
A great American industrial statesman, Clarence Francis, once said, "You can buy a man's time. You can buy a man's physical presence at a given place. You can even buy a measured number of skilled muscular motions per hour or day. But you cannot buy enthusiasm. You cannot buy initiative. You cannot buy loyalty. You cannot buy the devotion of hearts, minds, and souls. You have to earn these things." This, I believe, illustrates a great truth. We can earn human affection and respect only through understanding. It is our relationship with people, not people in a mass, but as individuals, which makes our own world rich or poor. I cannot truly understand everyone, but I can learn an amazing number of things about people if, when I look at them, I really see them, if, when I listen to them, I really hear them, and if, when I talk to them, I speak from my heart. The most commonplace person becomes extraordinary when we understand him. The gruffest manner may conceal the kindest heart. The most practical man may be the most idealistic. The quietest, the possessor of the most sparkling intellect. The most unlikely exterior may hide the greatest ability. The qualities of charm, warmth, wit, integrity, and unselfishness abound in people around us. During the Battle of Britain, we were amazed at the courage and stamina of the British people, who withstood month after month of heavy bombing without a lessening of their morale. People who had never faced danger or discomfort endured it heroically. Yet their courage was nothing new. They had always had it, but they had never needed to use it before. I believe that the faith we place in people is seldom disappointed. To expect the best of a man is almost assurance that you will receive it. When I give a man a job to do, I leave that job to him. It is his responsibility. His is the credit or the blame for what he makes of it. Generally, no two people do a thing in the same way. Every man brings to a problem a fresh point of view and a new approach. The value of individual effort and thinking can never be overestimated. In our company, our production workers often have solved problems on the job that management has wrestled with unsuccessfully. Once a man knows that his opinions are respected, that his ideas are valued, his energy and mind are turned to constructive interest in his work. I do not believe in men doing the work that machines can do, nor do I believe in hiring only the work of a man's hands when he is eager to give his heart and his mind to his job. I have never known, really known, a man or woman I couldn't like and respect. I hope I never do. Once we recognize the fact that every individual is a treasury of hidden and unsuspected qualities, our lives become richer, our judgment better, and our world is more right. This I believe. It is not love that is blind. It is only the unnoticing eye that cannot see the real qualities of man.
Next, we shall hear a belief in the value of suffering. Mrs. Marty Mann, who suffered all the mortifications of being an alcoholic, now sees it took suffering for her to break down the wall of self and needed. People gave her understanding and kindness, so that not having believed in anything, she came to believe in God and in the goodness in people. Now, she is devoting her life to helping alcoholics. And she remarks that one doesn't have to be beautiful or gifted or rich or powerful to offer help to a fellow sufferer. Here is Mrs. Mann's poignant statement.
I am an alcoholic, one of the fortunate ones who found the road to recovery. That was 13 years ago, but I haven't forgotten. I remember what it was like to be hopelessly in the grip of the vicious disease of alcoholism, not knowing what was wrong with me. I remember my desperate search for help. Failing to find it, I remember my inner despair, my outer defiance. I remember the arrogance and pride with which I faced the non-understanding world, in spite of my terrible hidden fears, my fear of life and my fear of death. At times, I feared life so much more than death that twice I sought death. Suicide seemed a welcome release from a terror and agony past bearing. How grateful I am now that I didn't succeed. But I believed in nothing then, not in myself, nor in anything outside myself. I was walled in with my suffering, alone, and, I thought, forsaken. But I wasn't forsaken, of course. No one is, really. I seemed to suffer alone, but I believe now that I was never alone, that none of us are. I believe, too, that I was never given more to bear than I could endure, but rather that my suffering was necessary for me. I believe it may well have taken that much suffering, in my case, to break down my wall of self, to crush my arrogance and pride, to let me seek and accept the help that was there. For in the depths of my suffering, I came to believe that there was a power greater than myself that could help me, to believe that because of that power, God, there was hope and help for me. I found my help through people, doctors whose vocation it is to deal with suffering, and other human beings who had suffered like myself. In the depths of my personal abyss, I received understanding and kindness and help from many individuals. People, I learned, can be very kind. I came to believe deeply in this, in people and the good that is in them. I came to realize that suffering is universal. It lies behind much apparent harshness and irritability,
many of the careless, even cruel words and acts which make our daily lives difficult so much of the time. I learned that if I could understand this, I might not react so often with anger or hurt. And if I learned to react to difficult behavior with understanding and sympathy, I might help to bring about a change in that behavior. My suffering helped me to know these things. I do not believe that everyone should suffer, but I do believe that suffering can be good and even necessary if, and only if, one learns to accept that suffering as part of one's essential learning process, and then to use it to help oneself and one's fellow sufferers. Don't we all endure suffering one way or another? This fact gives me a deep sense of kinship with other people and a consequent desire to help others in any and every way I can. It is this belief that underlies my work, for alcoholism is the area in which I feel best fitted, through my own experience, to help others. And I believe that trying to help my fellow men is one of the straightest roads to spiritual growth. It is a road everyone can take. One doesn't have to be beautiful or gifted or rich or powerful in order to offer a helping hand to one's fellow sufferers. And I believe that one can walk with God by doing just that.
Speaking as a journalist, I should say that until Queen Elizabeth was crowned, she first became known, like Queen Elizabeth, through her position. She presented any woman in American history. Mrs. Roosevelt being the wife of a president. She was her duties and interests and affection. Mrs. Roosevelt.
The beliefs we hold and the way we live by them seems to me very... I grew up in a family where certain old-time religious practices were observed. Nobody talked about it, but my grandmother never allowed any child to go to bed without kneeling down and saying their prayers, and thing in the morning. Thus we unconsciously absorbed the idea that life, and that you was greater than your own in the universe, and which could come through prayer to aid you in your weakness. My grandmother, who brought us up, had very simple religious beliefs. The words of the Bible down in the Old Testament or what was in the New Testament. We children were expected to take everything for granted, just as she did. As I grew older, I began to question certain things, and when I had children of my own, I was seriously troubled as to what I had a right to teach them as being absolutely certain truths. My husband, who was also in spiritual and religious matters a very simple person, answered my anxieties on this subject by saying, it never hurt us to be taught to read and accept what was in the Bible, and why not let the children be taught in the same way? He said when they grew up they would think things out for themselves. I decided that thinking things out was part of the process of growing up, and the only way in which you could make sure of what you did believe. And having made sure, then you must try to live it. This life always seems to me to be a continuing process of education and development. What we are preparing for, none of us can be sure, but that we must do our best while we are here and develop all our capacities is absolutely certain. Just what form the future life takes does not really matter to me. I'm willing to leave that in the hands of God. We face whatever we have to face in this life, and if we do it bravely and sincerely, we are probably accomplishing that growth which we were put here to accomplish. I feel the same way about the future. That is in the hands of God. If we have done our best here, we will probably be permitted to do our best in whichever way we can in the future.
Sir, editor of the Cleveland Ohio, has an appointment. He meets about the life he has lived that day. Over the years, it is as only, of course, it is more helpful. Let this editor's daily interview, Mr. Seltzer.
Each day, I have a special appointment. Unfailingly, I have kept it since a small boy. I intend to keep it every day for the rest of my life. I meet my God. With his help, I take an inventory of myself just before I release my mind to sleep. The measure by which he and I judge me is simple. It is a blunt, searching, severe inventory. It covers thoughts and acts and impulses and temptations and even tentative inclinations. In what respects have you failed? What thoughts had you that were not good? What man did you ignore? Were you completely honorable in all you did that day? I believe God gives. It is not much. In my case, I know it was not much. I am not sure today it is much. It is, however, up to me, with God's help, to fashion myself of that clay and those chemicals and that tentative personality and that spirit into something approximating what he should like me to be. In my wallet, I have 3 pieces of paper. They are yellowed and frayed. I refer to them constantly. One says, "What doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God?" Did I do so that day? Another says, "I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good, therefore, I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any fellow creature, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again." Did I measure up to that this day? Another says, "Make big plans, aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble life recorded will never die. At the end of the day, in communion with God, what of that?" I believe profoundly that each of us has a mission to perform as long as he lives. It is to take the foundation God gives us at birth and make of it, by discipline, such light as we let into our soul, such reason as we cultivate by nurturing our minds with the good thoughts and distilled wisdom of others and our own, by consciously lifting ourselves to the spiritual summits achieved by God and his good people, thus to make and strengthen ourselves so that in our time on this troubled planet we will have given to it something more than just our labor and our material accomplishments, something that we can measure as good in the sight of our God.
Out of dark silence has never a more beautiful language of idealism than from Helen Keller. No one ever has had to come through more impenetrable walls to join the human race. She knows sorrowfully, tragically. In her statement of beliefs, she has in a simple sentence. Once a deaf, blind, and dumb child, so mankind itself is growing out of the darkness of ignorance and hate into a brighter day. Miss Keller comes to the microphone with her companion, Miss Polly Thompson, and to read the message she has written.
It is Helen Keller who salutes you.
It is Helen Keller who salutes you.
Yeah, with my voice.
You are not familiar with my voice.
But my friend, as you understand, must interpret the beliefs I have written from my soul.
But my friend Raymond Sweefs, I have written from my soul.
I choose for my subject faith wrought into life, apart from creed or dogma. By faith, I mean a vision of good one cherishes, and the enthusiasm that pushes one to seek its fulfillment regardless of obstacles. Faith is a dynamic power, that breaks the chain of routine and gives a new fine turn to old commonplaces. Faith reinvigorates the will, enriches the affections, and awakens a sense of creativeness. Active faith knows no fear, and it is a safeguard to me against cynicism and despair. After all, faith is not one thing or two or three things. It is an indivisible totality of beliefs that inspire me. Belief in God as infinite goodwill and all-seeing wisdom, whose everlasting arms sustain me walking on the sea of life. Trust in my fellow men, wonder at their fundamental goodness, and confidence that after this night of sorrow and oppression, they will rise up strong and beautiful in the glory of morning. Reverence for the beauty and preciousness of earth, and a sense of responsibility to do what I can to make it a habitation of health and plenty for all men. Faith in immortality, because it renders less bitter the separation from those I have loved and lost, and because it will free me from unnatural limitations and unfold still more faculties I have in joyous activity. Even if my vital spark should be blown out, I believe that I should behave with courageous dignity in the presence of fate, and strive to be a worthy companion of the beautiful, the good, and the true. But fate has its master in the faith of those who surmount it, and limitation has its limits for those who live greatly. True faith is not a fruit of security. It is the ability to blend mortal fragility with the inner strength of the spirit. It does not shift with the changing shades of one's thought. It was a terrible blow to my faith when I learned that millions of my fellow creatures must labor all their days for food and shelter, bear the most crushing burdens, and die without having known the joy of living. My security vanished forever, and I have never regained the radiant belief of my young years that earth is a happy home and hearth for the majority of mankind. But faith is a state of mind. The believer is not soon disheartened. If he is turned out of his shelter, he builds up a house that the winds of the earth cannot destroy. When I think of the suffering and famine and the continued slaughter of men, my spirit bleeds. But the thought comes to me that like the little deaf, dumb, and blind child I once was, mankind is growing out of the darkness of ignorance and hate into the light of a brighter day.
We have by now listened to 8 statements of belief. I am sure you will agree that they have been rare and arresting statements. But in a way, they have been the affirmations of amateurs. The acknowledged masters of belief are the philosopher and the poet. They are the ones who know best what belief is and know most about communicating it. Now we come to our philosopher, Will Durant, teacher of philosophy, first at Columbia, then at the University of California. The public knows him as Will Durant, not as professor. That is because he is able to write and talk about beliefs in language the layman can grasp. It is in that language he now talks about his own beliefs. Mr. Durant.
I find in the universe so many forms of order, organization, system, law, and adjustment of means to ends that I believe in a cosmic intelligence, and I conceive God as the life, mind of the world. I do not understand my God, and I find in nature and history many instances of apparent evil, disorder, cruelty, and aimlessness. But I have a very limited vision, and that they might appear quite otherwise from a cosmic point of view. How can an infinitesimal part of the universe understand the whole? We are drops of water trying to understand the sea. I believe that I am the product. The logic of evolution seems to compel determinism, but I cannot overcome my direct consciousness of a limited freedom of will. I believe that if I could see any form of matter from within, as I can see myself through introspection, I should find in all forms what in ourselves is mind and freedom. I define virtue as any quality that makes for survival of the group is more important than the survival of the average individual, for group survival, cooperation. If my life lived up to my ideals, I would combine Christ, the virtues of a developing individual with those of the member of a group. I was a socialist in my youth and sympathized with the Soviet regime until I visited Russia in 1932. What I saw the extension of that system to any other land. Experience and history have taught me the instinctive bases and economic necessity of competition and private property. I am not so fanatical a worshiper of conservative friends. When liberty exceeds intelligence, it begets chaos, which begets dictatorship. We had too much economic liberty in the later 19th century due to our free external danger. We have too much moral liberty today due to increasing wealth and diminishing religious belief. The age of liberty, the freedom of the part, varies with the security of the whole. I do not resent the conflicts and difficulties of life. In my case, they have been far outweighed by good fortune, reasonable health, loyal friends, and a happy family life. I have met so many good people that I've almost lost my faith in the wickedness of mankind. I suspect that when I die, I shall be dead. I would look upon endless existence as a curse, as did the Flying Dutchman and the Wandering Jew. Death is life's greatest invention, perpetually replacing the worn with the new. And after 20 volumes, it will be sweet to sleep.
We shall now close with the poet. Admission of beliefs, for it is the poet's vocation to assert his beliefs eloquently. That has been so throughout the history of the search for truth. It is so today. Our poet is Carl Sandburg. His is the voice of America, which has constantly spoken to America. Carl Sandburg.
The man who sits down and searches himself for his answer to the question, what do I believe, is either going to write a book or a few well-chosen thoughts on what he thinks it might be healthy for mankind to be thinking about in the present tribulations and turmoils. I believe in getting up in the morning with a serene mind and a heart holding many hopes. And so large a number of my fellow worms in the dust believe the same that there is no use putting stress on it. I can remember many years ago a beautiful woman in Santa Fe saying, I don't see how anybody can study astronomy and have ambition enough to get up in the morning. She was putting a comic twist on what an insignificant speck of animate stardust each of us is amid cotillions of billion-year constellations. I believe in humility, though my confession and exposition of the humility I believe in would run into an old-fashioned 2 or 3 hour sermon. Also, I believe in pride, knowing well that the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins is named as pride. I believe in a pride that prays ever for an awareness of that borderline where, unless watchful of yourself, you cross over into arrogance, into vanity, into mirror gazing, into misuse and violation of the sacred portions of your personality. No single brief utterance of Lincoln is more portentous than the line he wrote to a federal authority in Louisiana. I shall do nothing in malice, for what I deal with is too vast for malicious dealing. Now, I believe in platitudes when they serve, especially that battered and hard-worn antique. eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Hand in hand with freedom goes responsibility. I believe that free men over the world cherish the earth as cradle and tomb, the handiwork of their Maker, the possession of the family of man. I believe freedom comes the hard way, by ceaseless groping, toil, struggle, even by a fiery trial and agony.
This is Ed Murrow again. You have heard the 10 statements of belief as they were contributed to the program This I Believe. I have said that we live in a time greatly concerned with beliefs. It is a time when it takes courage as well as integrity to formulate beliefs for oneself and to live by them. It is a time when mankind faces potential perils that transcend all past imaginings. But it is also a time when the miracles of communication are making it possible for a person anywhere to understand another person anywhere. It would be hard to think of a time when mankind seemed so close to one of two alternatives, destruction and utopia. Mr. Baruch says we cannot achieve utopia, and I agree. I also agree with him that we can escape destruction. But if we are to leave it behind and advance toward perfection, we must hold and live by beliefs. It takes more than the beliefs of 10 persons or a few hundred persons. They must be your beliefs and mine. And to matter, we must test them and translate them into action. This is Ed Murrow. Most of what we are told about the immortals of history concerns their actions and achievements in their own times. We hear much less about their basic personal beliefs. But they are immortal at least as much because of these as because of their creative achievements. The two are hardly separable. What we of This I Believe program dig for in every guest is his basic belief, since that is the essence of him. So it has been exciting to ask the authorities on our 10 immortals to bring us their beliefs. They have lived with these great men and women as friends. They have known them intimately and vividly. They have made themselves their contemporaries. These truths make contemporaries of us all. You may wonder how we came to make up our list of 10. We asked the guests who had appeared on the This I Believe program which of the immortals of history they would most wish to hear tell their own beliefs. We have pretty closely followed their replies. We are not applying a yardstick to greatness and saying that these 10 are the greatest. They just came naturally to mind. It happens that only 2 of them are ancients. Confucius and Socrates were shaping the concepts of men 300 to 400 years before the Christian era. But the next in sequence is Benjamin Franklin. On the clock of history, his America is only a few minutes away. So most of our figures are close to us in time. But however close, they shine already with the light that marks the historic great. They would be the last to regard their beliefs as original with them. Indeed, our oldest immortal, Confucius, taught that he was no more than the transmitter of the wisdom of the ancients. That gives us a hint about the time and the process it has taken to accumulate the wisdom of the race. The trails go back and are lost in obscurity. They come closer and lead straight to the giants who shaped it and handed it on to us. Confucius and Socrates were among the first of the giants. Socrates is the first you will hear. Thanks to the dramatic art of Sir Gilbert Murray, the Greek scholar, you will get a living, throbbing, almost burly Socrates, a man with a gusto for reason and right living. He had served inconspicuously in the army, and as Athens' most noted teacher, his classroom was often in the marketplace. Athens, like other great states, didn't always heed its wise men. It could become furious with them, even vindictive. And one measure of Socrates was his staunch loyalty to his perceptions and beliefs when they were unpopular. It is not trite to point out that the Athens that condemned Socrates has been extinct for ages, while the truth that was Socrates lives immortally. Certainly, Socrates is not out of date. Now hear him as portrayed by the inimitable Barry Jones.
Oh, what a crowd of people come to listen to me. You're as bad as the Athenians. Where do you come from? America? What is that? Found by Columbus? Who was he? I never heard of him. A big country in the Atlantic Ocean. Oh, now I understand. We used to call your country Atlantis. It was rather well spoken of in Athens. A very pleasant life, they tell me. Plenty of food and a great wish to learn. That is why you come to me, to learn. Oh, but I can't teach you anything. Oh, yes, I know the oracle at Delphi said I was the wisest of men, but that I explained long ago. We none of us really know anything. But I am wise enough to know that I don't know anything, and other people think they know such a lot when they don't. They don't even know how to live, and they won't learn. And the clever people, the sophists, won't teach them, but go off studying all kinds of useless things. What things? All about the stars and the sun and the beginning of the world and so on. Now take my master, Anaxagoras. He worked away, and at last he said that he had discovered that the sun was not a god, but just a mass of white-hot metal, frightfully hot and enormously big. I always used to say to him, "Dear master, all this may be true about the sun. I don't see how you know, since you've never been there, but anyway, you can't do anything about it. Why don't you try to know about men? You can see that they don't know how to live. Well, they all say they want to be better, but they don't seem to know what they mean. I ask them, what do you mean by better? And they say, oh, wiser and braver and more just. And when I follow up with the simplest question, what is justice or what is wisdom? They don't know. They talk nonsense and contradict themselves. They used sometimes to say that they really knew but couldn't quite find the words because I confused them. So then I gave up their words and simply looked at their actions, and the result was just the same. They did not know how to live. They were constantly doing bad things. Why? Oh, obviously because they didn't know what was bad and what good. Men cannot possibly wish to be bad men rather than good. And if they sometimes are, it must be from ignorance, because they don't know. I always wanted Anaxagoras, or some of these very clever people, to stop and teach them, instead of studying the sun and the moon. So at last I had to give up my life to trying to teach the men around me. At least I could question them and make them think how they were living, think what they really meant by good and bad, just or unjust. A few understood and did think and were grateful, but most people hated it and at last put me to death. It was quite unjust to kill me for making them think and uprooting some of their false beliefs, but they thought it was just and right. They didn't know. What false beliefs? Oh, largely about politics. It was the few against the many, both very violent. The few thought because they were prosperous and successful, they knew best how to govern a city. But of course they didn't really know, so they did the worst thing they could. They killed or banished those who had differed from them. Then the Democrats came back, and they did the worst thing they could by killing or banishing the few. The Democrats were very proud of themselves and quite as foolish as the others. They proclaimed that all men were equal. A good man no better than a bad man, an uneducated man just as good as an educated. Indeed, they actually held that the right people to manage a state were the masses of poor and unsuccessful people who had not known how to manage their own lives. Both sides were equally angry with me, though it happened to be the second which actually condemned me to death. I could have had a much lighter punishment if I'd been willing to plead guilty and ask for it, but I was not guilty, so how could I say I was? Then I could have escaped, but that would have been to break the law. I couldn't do that. Besides, how was I to know whether death was a good thing for me or a bad thing? Many wise men hold that the soul is immortal. I reflected that I might very well enter a life much better than this life and see the great men of the past, saints and heroes. And now, of course, I know much more and can tell you... Oh, I'm sorry. I see my time is up.
By now, It is a truism that Abraham Lincoln is the most loved of American historic leaders. He was the man who reached the summit of forbearance and love, when, toward the close of the bitterest of fraternal wars, he could say, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in. His nation strove to reach that summit after him, and mankind is still striving to do so. It is no easy climb, for not all men can be Lincolns. Lincoln never drafted his own creed into a single composition like another Gettysburg Address, but he set down his beliefs in many ways, on many occasions, and Paul M. Angle, author of The Lincoln Reader, has brought them together in a moving and authentic version. Now, Raymond Massey, loved for his portrayal of Lincoln, speaks these living words.
I cannot remember when I did not believe in God's omnipotence, although as a youth I used such terms as fate and the doctrine of necessity to express my conviction. On one occasion, when my old friend Joshua Speed was torn by indecision and I helped in my small way to give him resolution, I knew that the course I took was foreordained. When my father stood near death, I urged him to trust in our merciful Maker, confident that he would not fail him. Even recently, I have been compelled to confess that with all the power at my command, I was unable to control events, but that events, guided by Almighty God, controlled me. The will of God prevails. Through his power over us and our adversaries, he could have prevented the Civil War. He could, if he chose, have given victory to either side. I am forced to believe that he permitted the war to continue for some purpose which we were unable to comprehend. But that his purpose was beneficent, I do not doubt. Years ago, I asked myself, if man has no power over his own action, why should he trouble to choose one course over another? But I came to see that God had placed an obligation on me to ascertain his will and to conduct myself as a humble instrument in his hands. In this effort, I could not achieve perfection. But when I have taken as my guide the precept, whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, I do not believe I have erred greatly. This is the teaching that has kept me from indulging in personal resentments against those who have opposed me. At the time of my contest against Douglas, I was bespattered with every imaginable epithet, yet I held no grudges. I followed the same rule in 1860 and again in 1864. A man does not have time to spend half his life in quarrels. Still less can he afford to take all the consequences, such as the vitiating of his temper and his own chagrin at his loss of self-control. Rather than that, I have tried to avoid doing anything in malice and to forgive on the Christian terms of repentance. This teaching, too, has led me to do what I could to elevate the condition of the Negro. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. For years, I saw no way to end human bondage except to put it in the course of ultimate extinction. Now, I believe that the removal of this great wrong is assured. I see in this the realization of my long-standing wish that all men everywhere could be free. As I could not go calmly to my final reckoning if I had to answer for robbing any man of his goods, how could I rob someone of this freedom? But even in this attitude I take no vainglorious satisfaction, for it is written, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." To speak again of the will of God. Well-meaning men have urged one course or another on me on the ground that God so willed it. But I could not be sure. I believed it not irreverent to assume that if God would reveal my duty to others, he would as soon reveal it to me. Seeking more specific guidance, I have turned my thoughts from uncharitable passions, prejudices, and jealousies, and for the final triumph of the right, I strengthened my reliance on the Supreme Being.
We all know the Lady of the Lamp, who brought mercy to the suffering and lifted nursing out of degradation. But that was only a segment of Florence Nightingale. When she heard God's voice calling her, she was a girl, delighting in the whirl of aristocratic society. It took her 9 anguished years of struggle and renunciation to grope to her career. Nursing was to be only the beginning. She went on to spend a long lifetime as a sort of permanent unofficial cabinet minister in England. She had lasting influence in humanizing the life and ideas of England and India, and indeed the world. No one in her time wrought more works of welfare than she. She could have been the most adored darling of the century, but one of her total conquests was of her vanity. To do her work, she had to be unacclaimed. With her faith, she must move the mountains of bureaucracy from within. She was unsparing of herself and others, compassionate, superbly informed, and magnificently practical. Her beliefs have been drafted by her biographer, Mrs. Cecil Woodham Smith, and are spoken by the adored Catherine Cornell.
The course of my life has been decided by the single fact, the existence of suffering. When I was 17, God spoke to me and called me to his service. It was to be my work to lighten the burden of suffering in the world. I did not know how. I was not ready. I had to learn what was required of those who were to be the tools of God. For me, it meant to give up almost all that made life pleasant. I had to renounce human relationships, my family, even the felicity of marriage. I had to learn to bear being misunderstood. I had to learn to be alone. One of my greatest temptations was to be praised and admired and to be a general favorite. What I had to learn was to do God's work for the sake of the work, not for the thanks. It took years to accomplish this. My actual work did not even begin before I had suffered enough to learn it. I came back from the Crimean War knowing I had failed. I had left 73% of 8 regiments in their graves from disease alone. I had sat at the bedside of 2,000 dying men. I could never forget. The blood of these dead men did not cry out for vengeance. It cried for mercy on the survivors. This was the work to which I had to give myself. My family were wealthy and agreeable, but they had the conventional attitude of 1820. They planned my life. They stubbornly fought my going to the Crimea and the career I chose. But everyone must decide one's own life. While my mind was made up, I knew my feelings were not enough. They had to be translated into action. I had to drive without surcease, drive myself first of all. I must allow no consideration of my own personal relations, of comfort or health, to deflect me from putting forth the fullest effort of which I was capable. I faced a dual undertaking to see that suffering was alleviated. That is, by the development of nursing and sanitation, and to effect the reforms in government administration and habits and attitudes that will permit the condemned to live. I had to master this subject to the last detail, but to work always in the shadow of the men to whom the decision was committed. I believed in efficiency. Without it, good intentions and enthusiasm are of little worth. I knew that efficiency could only come through training. I've insisted that those who elect to serve God by doing practical good be at least as competent as those who work for money. That view is unpopular. For many like the acclaim and credit of doing good, but won't learn the job as a professional or work as hard as if paid. But competence in administration, accuracy in keeping accounts, foresight in arranging for supplies can save lives as well as the tender and expert care in the sick room. As I look back, I believe the establishment of training has been almost the most important part of my work. I believed in working wherever possible through existing regulations. I was not a rebel. I had to overcome great antagonism, but for my part, I always cooperated. And I believed in the wisdom of modest beginnings. I went to the Crimea with 40 nurses and would rather have had only 20. The small beginning, the quiet work without publicity, the gradual struggle, these are the elements from which achievement can come. I've been asked how, as a woman alone, I had the courage to set out to produce some of the greatest changes of our times. If there was courage, the glory is God's. God called me, sustained me, impelled me. But though belief in God is my life, I do not attach importance to the doctrines of any particular sect. God may be reached by many roads. If I belong to any sect, it is one that is small and has no churches and teaches no dogma. It is the sect of the Good Samaritan.
Confucius died in 479 BC, 80 years before the death of Socrates. His China was a feudal world, and like Europe in the Middle Ages, dizzy with disorder. Confucius grew up in indignation over the corruption and selfishness around him. He became a teacher with a passion for good government. He taught 3,000 disciples. He instructed and influenced rulers. He became a reform mayor and served as minister of justice. As such, we are told, he convicted a high official and did away with crime. That is, he was a man of action. He did not found a religion, but he certainly was one of the most effective educators of history, for he has been called the most potent single factor for 25 centuries in shaping the life and character of the Chinese people. What Confucius believed has been epitomized by the American philosopher Will Durant and is spoken by the Chinese philosopher and diplomat Dr. Hu Shi.
Would you like to know what an old Chinese philosopher thinks of the world? First, let me get rid of other words. I believe there are spiritual forces in the universe, but I cannot know the nature of supernatural beings. And this life is so interesting that I give no thought to death or the beyond. My absorbing interest in life is in human character. Intellect is good. Intelligence is better, but it is character that uses the intellect as its servant and makes a man bad or good, weak or great. I've tried to train character through education. I taught my students 4 subjects chiefly. History, that they might be inspired by the achievements of man and restrained by learning his nature. Poetry, that they might have imagination. Music, that rhythm and grace might enter their souls. And manners, that they might become gentlemen. For when good manners decay, the state begins to die. I believe in the uncommon man. It is the uncommon man who begets new ideas and offers new exemplars for our imitation. I do not know how to make all men equal, but if I can make good men able or able men good, their example will raise the people to integrity and civilization. I believe that education must do more for the uncommon man, that special training, above all, training in character, should be given to the best students in the hope of producing a higher type of man for human leadership. Men who will be anxious to acquire truth rather than wealth or honors, who will be sincere with the facts and not distort them with partisanship or dogma, who will never fawn upon those above them, nor ever scorn those below them, who will understand with sympathy the problems of other men, and who will never do to others what they would not have others do to them. I believe in the force of example. The wise men of ancient China, when they wished to disseminate the highest virtues among mankind, first ordered well their own states. Wishing to order their states well, they first regulated their own families. Wishing to regulate their families, they first sought to cleanse their own hearts. Wishing to cleanse their hearts, they first sought to be sincere in their thinking. Wishing to be sincere in their thinking, they first extended their knowledge to the uttermost. Reform begins at home, and utopia is nowhere except in the clean heart and understanding mind.
Our next immortal is one who needed the stability of the firmest beliefs to lead his country and himself safely through the dark dangers of World War II. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is still a controversial figure, but as to his beliefs in God, in his fellow man, in the blessings of peace, there is and can be no discord. He was a man whose beliefs enabled him to triumph over the severest personal adversity and achieve remarkable serenity and the confidence he imparted to his times. He now lives again in the statement of his beliefs as formulated by dramatist Robert E. Sherwood, and they are voiced by his son, Franklin, now Congressman Roosevelt, who has inherited much from his father, including traces of his inflections.
Shakespeare's Mark Antony said, "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones." I must say that I believe the opposite. I believe that that which is evil in mankind is forever condemned to death. I believe that that which is good in mankind is immortal. It is written in the book of Genesis, God created man in his own image. This is the beginning of education. It is the foundation of faith. Our faith may be challenged when we contemplate the evil of which men can be capable, and we have seen in our own age as terrible, as inhuman, as in the darkest ages of the past. But the very fact that we use the word inhuman means that we know such evils to be against nature, against God, and therefore against the divine spirit that is in man. This I believe. I was born and brought up in the happy valley of the Hudson River. As a boy, I traveled about Europe on a bicycle. You needed no passport to cross frontiers in those days except in one country. And that one country was Russia, then under the tyranny of the Tsars. It was inconceivable to me that world war could be imposed upon countless millions of people who hated the very thought of war. I was still a young man when I learned otherwise, and I continued to learn otherwise throughout my life. And yet, all of the awful events that I have known and seen have only served to strengthen the faith in which I was born. For the more evil that has been generated on earth, the more good has emerged to combat and conquer that evil. 20 years of my life as a public servant were spent in Washington. It is impossible to live for long in our national capital without developing a sense of the past and of the future, a sense that the good that men do will live after them. The story of our country did not begin on July 4th, 1776. It did not begin with the Mayflower Compact, nor with Columbus and De Soto and Drake. It began with the first men in the earliest chapters of recorded history who were ready to fight and die for the right to worship their own God in their own way, the right to love their neighbors as themselves, to trade honorably with their neighbors, to live with their neighbors at peace. We are the inheritors of the greatness of all the centuries going back to the Magna Carta of Old England, to the Athenians who built the first democracy, to the Israelites whom God delivered out of bondage because they had earned deliverance by their devotion to his word. We of this 20th century, in all free countries of the civilized world, we are the inheritors and we are the perpetuators of freedom. And we means each and all of us, not only the men in high places of responsibility. On the morning of the day when I first went to the Capitol to take the oath of office as president, I prayed for help from all of the people. I was given that help generously and unselfishly, and I am forever grateful and proud that this help was given voluntarily. It could not have been commanded. For our freedom is a personal thing. It is the private property of every one of us. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear. This I believe in life and in death.
Queen Victoria, ruler of the greatest empire of modern times, stamped her personality on an epoch that bears her name and reflects her character. The Queen is respected and celebrated, but the woman who was Queen has not been easily accessible to the world. It is she who now will be introduced to you in a touching scene written by her biographer, Hector Belitho, and portrayed by the actress who played Victoria with notable success, Helen Hayes. Victoria is heard speaking from the garden of Buckingham Palace on June 20, 1897, the day of her Diamond Jubilee.
How well I remember being called from my bed by Mamma 60 years ago to receive the news of my accession. Last Sunday, I was reading some of my journals from those early days. It is frightening to see oneself coming to life from old pages on which one wrote, oh, so long ago, with all one's follies and mistakes. I suppose Lady Littleton was right when she spoke of the vein of iron in me when I was young. It shows so bitterly in what I wrote on that first day as Queen. My dear mother had guarded me through the sad and lonely years of my childhood. Yet from the moment I got out of bed and went into the sitting room, I thought of the word, alone. I wrote in my journal as if it were a sort of challenge. I wrote, I saw dear Lord Melbourne quite alone. And I took my dinner upstairs, alone. That night I slept in my bedroom, alone, for the first time in my life. Of course, I was very young, but the vein of iron was deeply wrong. I know that. It showed in a way I cannot forgive myself for. When dear Albert came to England, I wrote of my fear of marriage to him, of my great repugnance to change. Those were my very words. I was afraid he would thwart me, oppose me in what I liked. I thought that would be a dreadful thing. Then I beheld him, stepping from his coach at Windsor, looking so beautiful. As the days passed, riding in the park, playing duets, I knew that I loved him and that he loved me. And this I believe with all my heart, that my character was changed by our love. As he said, the way was plentifully strewn with thorns. He complained to a friend, soon after our very pretty wedding, that he was only the husband, not the master in the house. But we walked clear of the thorns, because our love was blessed by God. Albert and I always prayed together. Ours was a Christian marriage. During those early years, I prayed for humility. God listened to my prayer. Our happiness endured for almost 21 years. Then My husband died in the terrible winter of 1861. I have been blamed very much because I shut myself away during the years that followed. But I was very lonely, walking through those big rooms with nobody ever again to call me Victoria, as he used to do. But I did not neglect my tasks. No one can ever say that. The endless papers, the problems of a growing family and of a growing empire. No, I did not neglect my tasks. Slowly my faith came back to me. I began to realize that if one has loved in the light of God, all that matters in one's love survives even after death. My dear Albert seemed to emerge out of the darkness of my grief to guide me. I remember one day when Lord Tennyson came. He was very old and shaky on his feet then, and we sat together and had such a nice long talk. And he recited In Memoriam to me. It had always been such a comfort in my dark times. Do you remember the words? Strong Son of God, immortal love, whom we that have not seen thy face, by faith and faith alone embrace, believing where we cannot prove. Believing where we cannot prove. And then Lord Tennyson said to me, you are so alone on that terrible height. As I sit here in the garden, with all the millions of people waiting in the streets for me to drive by, I find myself thinking back of what Lord Tennyson said, alone on a terrible height. But I am not alone. My husband once said to me, we don't know in what state we shall meet again, but that we shall recognize each other and be together in eternity. I am perfectly certain. These were my dear Albert's words, and I believe them with all my heart.
Benjamin Franklin was one of America's most ardent and fruitful seekers after truth. From his youth onward, he paid an enormous amount of attention to his values, standards, and beliefs. His was a big intellect that ranged far. He enlarged the knowledge of science, made innumerable inventions of lasting service, created forms of social organization still part of the framework of our time. And as a statesman, he contributed greatly to the young republic he helped dedicate to freedom. Wholesome, indefatigable, ingenious, effective, and wise, he was an extraordinarily complete and functioning man. Here he is, in his words as chosen by Dr. Henry Butler Allen of the Franklin Institute, and spoken by the gifted Jose Ferrer.
When I was a boy, a book entitled Essays to Do Good had an influence on my conduct throughout life. It led me to set a greater value on the character of a doer of good than on any other kind of reputation. My parents in Boston had early given me religious impressions and brought me through childhood piously in a dissenting way. I grew convinced that truth, sincerity, and integrity in dealings between man and man were of the utmost importance to the felicity of life, and I formed written resolutions to practice them while I lived. My early thinking led directly into my matured convictions. I had never doubted the existence of the deity, that he had made the world and governed it by his providence, and the most acceptable service to God was the doing of good to man, that our souls are immortal, and that all crime will be punished and virtue rewarded either here or hereafter. These I consider the essentials of every religion, and being ground in all the religions we have in our country, I respect them all, though with different degrees of respect, for I find them more or less mixed with other articles which, without any tendency to inspire, promote, or confirm morality, served principally to divide us and make us unfriendly to one another. By the time I was 22, I had become firmly convinced that to carry out my conviction about a useful life, I must arrive at moral perfection. As I know, or thought I knew, what was right and wrong, I did not see why I might not always do one and avoid the other. I was then very young, for now I know that while perfection is not possible, striving for it is good and does good. But as a boy, I started a plan to make myself perfect. This plan I kept to all my life. I enumerated the moral virtues I wanted to acquire in a little book, one to a sheet. I concentrated on one virtue for each week successively. I prayed every morning, and before going to bed, I would mark by a spot every fault I committed respecting that virtue that day. I was surprised to find myself fuller of fault than I imagined. Here are some examples of them. Can you improve on them? Temperance. Eat not to dullness. Drink not to elevation. Silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. Frugality. Make no expense but to do good to others or yourself. That is, waste nothing. Industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles. Humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates. In reality, there is perhaps nothing so hard to subdue as pride. Disguise it, struggle with it as much as one pleases, it is still alive. Even if I could conceive I had completely overcome it, I should probably be proud of my humility. I have enemies, some in England who are enemies as an American, some in America who are enemies as minister plenipotentiary. Some are enemies of my ideas. But there is not one enemy of Ben Franklin, the man, for there is no one who can justly say, Ben Franklin has wronged me. This, my friends, is, in old age, a comfortable reflection.
The fact that Will Rogers is among our immortals shows how comfortably democracy suits the Parnassus of the intellectuals. Immortals just don't have to be highbrows. Will Rogers was the common man's philosopher. His glory was that he was a common man. Thanks to the techniques of modern communication, he became perhaps the most popular motion picture actor, commentator, columnist, and lecturer of his day. In the replies of those we asked which immortals they most wished to hear, Rogers stood 10th, and those who answered were largely highbrows. The tribute was not only to his warm, homespun simplicity, but to the earthy validity of his wisdom. His beliefs have been reconstructed by his friend and appointed biographer, Donald Day, and are voiced by his son, Will Rogers, Jr.
The comedian's not supposed to be serious or to know much. As long as he's silly enough to get laughs, why, people let it go at that. But I claim you have to have a serious streak in you, or you can't see the funny side of the other fella. I use only one set of methods in my gags, and that is to try and keep to the truth. People used to ask me, Will, where do you get all your jokes? And I'd tell them, I just watch Congress and report the facts. Of course, I may have sometimes exaggerated a little, but whatever I've said, I've tried to base on truth. I'd a whole lot rather have people nudge each other and say, you know, he's right about that, than get a big laugh. But now, truth ain't always easy to come by. The only thing I've found that it's absolutely necessary for a man to have is religion. Never mind what kind, but it's got to be something, or you'll fail in the end. Although I haven't been able to see where anybody has a monopoly on the right truth in religion, I do know that the Lord was pretty wise in making one thing common to all of them, and that is, the better life you live, the better you finish. And I've tried to live my life so that whenever I lose, I'm ahead. Now, everybody got a scheme to set the United States back right again. Although, come to think of it, I can't remember when it ever was right. There have been times when it was right for you, or you, but never all of you at the same time. I believe this country's pretty much just the same as it always was, and always will be, because it's founded on right. And even if everybody in public life tried to ruin it, they couldn't. Trying to stop this country now would be like trying to stop a train by spitting on a railroad track. No element, no party, not even Congress or the Senate can really hurt this country now. And we're not where we are on account of any one man. We're here on account of the real common sense of the big normal majority. This country is bigger than any man or any party. They couldn't ruin it even if they tried. But in believing this, I don't believe that you can just sit down and do nothing. There ain't no civilization where there ain't no satisfaction. And satisfaction don't come from just money and property and a bunch of bathtubs. I could be mighty rich, but if I ain't got friends, then I'm poorer than anybody. And if I fell out with people because of a difference of opinion, I wouldn't have many friends. Difference of opinion is what makes horse racing and missionaries. A white man gets lost and an Indian doesn't, because an Indian always looks back after he's passed anything, so he can see it both front and back. For that reason, I never try to disagree with a man when I'm facing him. I like to go around behind him and look the same way he's looking. Then I see things that I didn't see before. And after looking over his shoulder and getting his viewpoint, then I can go back and face him. Every man has an angle on living or on life or on something, and when you get it, things are apt to look different. Every man's got something good or worth knowing in him. Well, this is what I believe. And because I believe it, I can honestly say I never met a man I didn't like.
With the discovery of radium began the more intimate knowledge of the nature of matter that led to the fission of the atom and the beginning of the atomic age. The two Polish scientists, expatriated in France, Pierre and Marie Curie, who made that discovery, are thus numbered among the pioneer workers of a scientific revolution, probably the most far-reaching in human history. Many have contributed to this inscrutable revolution, but these two explorers stand out in their devotion to science and their unselfish service of mankind. Marie Curie is presented here in the statement of her gifted daughter and biographer, Eve Curie, who also speaks her mother's words.
Life is not easy for any man or woman. We must have perseverance and, above all, confidence in ourselves. We must believe that we are gifted for something, and that this thing, whatever the cost, must be attained. What ultimately matters is to be able to say when the end comes, I did what I could. Once in the spring, during weeks of forced idleness at home from a severe illness, I watched cocoons being made by silkworms that my daughters were raising. It interested me immensely. Looking at the caterpillars working with such obstinacy and such eagerness, I felt somehow that I resembled them very much. Like them, I always drove patiently toward a single goal. I probably did so because something compelled me, just as the silkworm is compelled to spin its cocoon. I have devoted almost half a century to scientific research, which is fundamentally a quest for truth. I have memories of marvelous happiness. They were in the solitary years of study as a young girl at the Sorbonne in Paris. They were in all the time when my husband and I, living with one single preoccupation, as if in a dream, toiled so hard in the miserable old shed where we were to make the discovery of radium. What I always wanted from my existence was work surrounded by silence and a simple family life. I was given them, though the time came when I had to strive desperately to protect them from the invasion of publicity, from the noise of fame. I believe that in science we should be interested in things, not persons. When Pierre Curie and I had to decide whether to draw financial gains from our discovery, we both felt that it would be contrary to our conception of pure research. So we did not take out a patent for the purification of radium, thereby throwing away a fortune. I am convinced that we were right. True, humanity needs practical men who get the most out of their work. But it also needs the dreamers, those for whom the selfless development of an enterprise is so absorbing that they can have no devotion and no time left for material profit. My sole ambition was to work as a free scholar in a free country, and this particular privilege I never took for granted. Until I was 24, I had lived in a captive and oppressed Poland. I measured the price of French liberty. I was not born with a peaceful soul. I understood very early that persons who felt things as sharply as I did and could suffer absurdly even from one harsh word had to try and conceal their sensitiveness as much as possible. I derived great help from my husband's gentle serenity. After the catastrophe of his sudden death, I had to learn resignation. As I became older, I came to appreciate more and more such simple things as growing flowers, planting trees, building a house, recalling a piece of poetry, or looking at the stars and trying to identify them. I have always been captivated by the beauty of the world, to which the science I love constantly adds new vistas. I also think that science itself has a great beauty. A scientist doing his research is not only a technician. He is also a child placed before natural phenomena that impress him like a fairy tale. This magic is perhaps the reason above all others which kept me at work in a laboratory all my life.
The last of our immortals was the central figure in the national drama of the largest number of persons ever to win political independence in history. Even so, it is not easy to know just what place history will finally assign to Mahatma Gandhi. That it will be among the highest is obvious. But Gandhi did even more than lead India to liberation. He created a new and incalculable force, the power of non-violent resistance. In India, this power proved stronger than troops and guns. Is this a social force that somehow may take the place of troops and guns? The atomic age is not one in which military power can remain the texture of international relations. Gandhi was not a pacifist who washed his hands of conflict and sacrifice. His was an implacable zeal, which, if it refused to kill to gain freedom, did not refuse to die for it. The masses of Asia are being moved and molded by Gandhi. Only economically are the Asians lagging. Spiritually, they continue to give mankind some of its greatest leaders. Gandhi's beliefs have been edited for us by Louis Fisher and are spoken by Sir Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Vice President of India.
I believe that the core of all religions is the same. Otherwise, they would not be religions. I consider myself a Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Farsi, Buddhist, and Confucian. Rivalry among creeds degrades them. The idea of my God is better than your God repels me. Nor do I believe in the superiority of nations or races. There is good and bad in all of them. I would not hurt England to help India. Peace at the expense of some nations is only an armistice. Peace between countries must rest on the solid foundation of love between individuals. Love gives me a partnership in the cares and needs of others. Hate and competition then yield to cooperation. Love is the elixir of growth. I believe that I achieve my highest stature by merging my ego in other individuals. This is love, or tender identification. My love of my fellow men does not depend on their agreeing with me or following me. I smile on the dissenter. Disloyalty to my ideas is a gulf easily bridged by friendship and affection. Civilization, I hold, is the acceptance and the encouragement of differences. Civilization thus becomes a synonym of democracy. Force, violence, pressure, or compulsion with a view to conformity is therefore both uncivilized and undemocratic. Force leads to fear, and fear makes a small man. I have tried throughout life to banish fear, for if I fear, I am not free. Fear, I am convinced, resides in possessions. My heart is where my worldly goods are, and by worldly goods, I mean not only treasure and property, I mean also power, popularity, even this body of mine. Were I to put a high value on these, I would hesitate to give them up in payment for principles. An attack on my principles would then make me cringe and retreat. I'm not against wealth. I'm against the wealth that enslaves. No possession must have a veto power over my actions. I fast when the cause for which I fast is more important to me than life itself. I renounce because that which I renounce affords me less pleasure than the fruits of renunciation. I'm an ordinary person, subject to many frailties, and if I have any right to speak about myself, it is only thanks to my successful experiments in living. My life is action. I believe that I must live what I believe. I have attempted to eliminate the conflict between what I believe, what I do, and what I say. This is truth. I preach what I practice. The result is an integration which brings inner harmony. In the face of a wrong, I cannot remain supine and merely wring my hands, utter pious regrets, and thereby salve my conscience. I share responsibility for all the evils in the world unless I combat them. The poor and the oppressed are my first and chief preoccupation. But I'll not act for them. I act with them. They must not be passive or indifferent. I fear resignation more than failure. Action in a right cause ennobles, though the results be meager, for means are more important than ends. Actually, there are no ends in life. There is even no end to life, for every end is a beginning in another incarnation. There are only means. Every means is a means to another means. Means accordingly make the man, and they must be clean and beautiful. I believe that God is no dictator. He leaves us freedom to master ourselves.
You have heard Gandhi say that he considered himself a Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Parsi, Buddhist, and Confucian. I want to go on with that thought for a moment. Most of us, like many of the immortals we have heard, are products of the Christian era. Some of the statements made here have been visibly woven of the teachings of Jesus Christ, and indeed the cloth of our civilization is so woven. Christ's teaching of love, which includes love of enemies and his practical love that helps and serves and forgives, are the aspiration and inspiration of all Christians. The fatherhood of God must mean the brotherhood of man. We must love our neighbors as ourselves. Christ laid down the golden rule, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. More than 400 years earlier, Confucius had formulated precisely the same precept, only his golden rule was in the negative. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Many of the central beliefs of the world's faiths have this near identity. Sometimes beliefs have divided men at terrible cost, and they continue to divide them. But men are more united than divided by beliefs, and are more united than they may realize. As the world shrinks in the workshop of modern and practical science, the acceptance of this unity becomes the most urgent need in human affairs. Gandhi found he could embrace all the faiths. Indeed, there is an inner harmony in them. One keynote of the teaching of Mohammed is charity, and every good act, he explained, is charity. In the teaching of the Buddha, one keynote was the extinction of egotism. Again, to pick out a single passage, he said, "To the highest bliss has he attained who has conquered all selfishness and vanity." All the leading religions teach love. First of all, the love of God, and then the love of all men. They all teach non-injury and non-killing. What love can a man possess, asked the Buddha, who believes that the destruction of life can atone for evil deeds? The great religions all teach the priority of spiritual over material riches. They all teach the worth of the individual and his capacity to grow nearer to God. And they all agree on the principle of unity, the unity of the universe, the unity of the human family. To this unity, all men are taught that they belong. One may well hope that enough of them will come to believe it, in time to make the progress toward it now so urgently needed. That is a personal contribution that must come from each of us.